should be opened to allow the movement of refugees
fleeing the advance and the brutality.
In Australia, to do with asylum seekers.
Overcrowded refugee camps in Lebanon, Syrian asylum seekers,
more Palestinian refugees,
2 million Syrians.
People with absolutely nothing.
Welcome to Borders, a broadcast about migration and refugees, by Aitor Sáez, every Thursday at 4 p.m.
It is really hard to express in words the human suffering that they lay out before us.
On air in Serres, Greece, and also on internet, rodonfm.net. Europe usually boasts about its respect of the human rights and the protection of life. The German president Joachim Gauck, for example, about the asylum policy, said, "Protecting lives and granting refugees the chance to be heard is at the foundation of our legal and moral codes." That sounds nice as well as politically correct. The reality is quite different. There are people detained for indefinitely in inhuman Greek police stations, people dying in the Mediterranean coast of Italy, in the border of Spain, and even people taking their own lives in Germany because of the fear to be deported and the oppressive asylum system. The statistics will come later. Now I am talking about people, a term that the European Union often forgets when referring to immigrants. In our continent there come Afghani, Iraqi, Somali, 300, 1,000, but never people. The political, social and media use of the language reflects a gap in the European society. We distinguish ourselves from people outside our borders. It is true that we haven't had any war in Western Europe for 70 years. And it is also true that we reached a notable integration between countries. Nevertheless, we still divide the people into categories. The economic crisis was woken up not only the racist phantoms, but a general feeling against the immigrants. And the political class is adapting their decisions to the public opinion. The biggest danger of this entire spiral is that some European governments are violating the human rights conventions by acting under the community directives. Perhaps rethinking our identity is not our priority, but it will be completely necessary. We cannot aspire to win the Nobel Peace Prize while we don't respect the life of all people. We can close borders and keep a pure European town, or we can open our minds, make inclusive policies, and go on a history of diversity. Here, in Borders, in this program, we prefer the second one. You are listening to Borders in Rodon FM, Greece, and I am Aitor Sáez. Welcome.
Welcome to Borders, the broadcast about migration and refugees issues. Our main challenge: break the borders.
The music of Syria is largely emanates from the country's capital Damascus and the largest city Aleppo. Syria has long been one of the Arab world's centers for cultural and artistic innovation, especially in the field of classical Arab music. Muwasha is the name for both an Arabic poetic form and a secular musical genre. The poetic form consists of a multiple-line strophic verse poem written in classical Arabic. One of the forms is the Wasla from Aleppo. Our program today will be about Syria, the country which is living the biggest exodus since the Second World War. We are listening a Muwasha performed by Sissel Otaka, Hamza Eldin, and Morgan Fisher. Syria had a population around 22 million. The 4 years old civil war had resulted in almost 200,000 deaths, with war crimes being committed with total impunity on all sides in the conflict. In August 2013, Bashar al-Assad's government was suspected of using chemical weapons against its civilians. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said it was undeniable that chemical weapons had been used, and that means a moral obscenity against his own people. John Kerry about the use of chemical weapons in Syria.
What we saw in Syria last week should shock the conscience of the world. It defies any code of morality. Let me be clear. The indiscriminate slaughter of civilians, the killing of women and children and innocent bystanders by chemical weapons is a moral obscenity. By any standard, it is inexcusable, and despite the excuses and equivocations that some have manufactured, it is undeniable. What is before us today is real, and it is compelling. So I also want to underscore that while investigators are gathering additional evidence on the ground, our understanding of what has already happened in Syria is grounded in facts, informed by conscience and guided by common sense. Our sense of basic humanity is offended not only by this cowardly crime, but also by the cynical attempt to cover it up. At every turn, the Syrian regime has failed to cooperate with the UN investigation, using it only to stall and to stymie the important effort to bring to light what happened in Damascus in the dead of night. President Obama has also been in close touch with leaders of our key allies, and the President will be making an informed decision about how to respond to this indiscriminate use of chemical weapons. But make no mistake, President Obama believes there must be accountability for those who would use the world's most heinous weapons against the world's most vulnerable people. Nothing today is more serious, and nothing is receiving more serious scrutiny. Thank you.
Discussion.
Due to this massacre and suffering, 1/3 of the Syrian population had to flee. An estimated 9 million Syrians have fled their homes since the outbreak of the civil war in March 2011, taking refuge in neighboring countries or within Syria itself. According to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, over 3 million have fled to Syria's immediate neighbors, Turkey, Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq. 6.5 million are internally displaced within Syria. Meanwhile, under 150,000 Syrians have declared asylum in the European Union, while member states have pledged to resettle a further 33,000 Syrians. The vast majority of these resettlement spots, 85%, are pledged by Germany. In the case of Greece, Syrians are the second largest group of asylum application. Since the opening of the new Greek asylum service in July 2013, Greece gave the refuge status to the 99% of Syrian applicants, around 600. That seems ridiculous compared with the 9 million displaced Syrian people. Is Europe doing enough to solve this humanitarian crisis? We are gonna listen an interesting interview with Klaus Sorensen, General Director of the Directorate Humanitarian Aid and Civil Protection. At the European Commission, the interview was run by the creators of the SyrianRefugees.eu. Before listening the track, we want to strongly recommend visiting the webpage SyrianRefugees.eu, where you can find information about the migration issues in Syria with visual material, timelines, and high professional essays. Now, Klaus Sorensen about the role of the European Union and the Syrian refugees issue.
We're talking about 1/3 of the population, if not more, that have been displaced, then are in needs. Quite a lot of them have fled to neighboring countries, putting an enormous strain on, for example, Lebanon and Jordan, not to speak now about Iraq and the southern part of Turkey. And at the same time, every day, people are dying, disappearing in prisons, schools are being destroyed. You have children now that for 2 years have not been in schools. And you can imagine that besides the humanitarian crisis, you have created instability to such an extent that these youngsters will become the breeding ground for terrorism and all kinds of extremism in the future. So it's a catastrophe in humanitarian terms, but it is actually also a catastrophe in political terms. We are not at all on the top of all the needs and all the events that are unfolding. In particular, we are very concerned about besieged areas where populations are blocked, be it by the government or the opposition, in villages, in townships, or what we call difficult to reach areas where actually the government and the rebels do allow access, but it is very, very complicated. So whatever we do is facing enormous hurdles on the ground, let alone the issue of sheer security. Because even if you negotiate your passage with a convoy, you risk being surprised by shelling or shooting, and unfortunately quite a number of humanitarians have paid the ultimate price. So what are the priorities? The priorities are, of course, basic food and shelter. In particular, in the winter, we have to understand that in Syria you have a continental climate. In the winter it can get very, very cold. And if you live just behind a plastic sheet, it is simply not enough to survive. So shelter is actually also important. We need basic medical services. And this is highly complicated because the medical equipment can be diverted to be used by rebels or the government. And obviously both parties sometimes go in and they snatch the equipment and divert it for other purposes. But we have to continue to deliver. We need nutrition for babies and pregnant mothers. We know that in such a situation of civil war, it's the weakest of the weakest that are suffering. We have to press the government to allow visits to prisons. What goes on in these prisons is unspeakable. Torture, disappearances, numerous young men and women have led their lives in those prisons, and access has been very, very scant, to say the least. So everything that can be done to negotiate with the government, speaking with the devil, so to speak, allowing access has to be pursued. But it's an enormous task, and I have to say that at the end of the day, it is about political will. It is about the Syrian government and also the rebels knowing that those that finance them and those that protect them actually push them to allow a minimum of protection of the civilian population. And this, I have to say, does not happen enough. Obviously, there are people that would like to go to Europe and resettle. And there is a willingness to open up in Europe. I would say I'm not surprised that with the economic crisis we have, with the level of unemployment, it is perhaps much to ask for that we open up for 1 million Syrians or 1.2 million Syrians. I mention these numbers because these numbers are the total numbers of refugees, which is Syrians that have left Syria to go to Lebanon, to go to Jordan, Iraq or Turkey. And obviously to go to Europe is a further step, and the numbers we will receive in Europe will never ever compare to what actually the neighboring countries are receiving. So we may feel guilty about that, but I believe that it is our duty to help the refugees mainly inside Syria and in the neighboring countries. Of course, it is a daunting task. In particular, I'm worried for Lebanon, because Lebanon is a country that now is hosting a quarter of their population. I mean, if you imagine in France, it would be the whole valley of the Rhone, including Marseille and the coast, only refugees. Well, it is true that some of the countries that are closer to Syria face an unprecedented pressure on their external borders. We all know what is going on in Sicily and in Lampedusa. We know what is going on in Bulgaria and in Greece. And frankly speaking, politically, it is a very challenging situation for those countries. Are there cases where there has been refoulement, where there have been breaches of the fundamental rights that we have to give to asylum seekers? We have heard the same rumors, and there have been cases. I can just say that the Commission is pursuing these cases, investigating, because in our European rulebook there is an obligation to allow asylum seekers to state their case, test whether they are genuine asylum seekers or whether they are economic refugees. And we are following that very, very closely. There is a dilemma, of course, as to how you control the outer border of the Schengen area. And we do believe that we need a strong border. That is why we have Frontex, which is the European agency dealing with external borders. Some people believe it is actually too weak. Others believe that it is of the right size, but then again, perhaps it needs strengthening in some areas. The whole purpose is that we do need borders that are adequately controlled, but the way we do it has to be proportional to the flow that goes over the border. And that is why you have heard also commissioners being a little bit critical about actually building walls and using barbed wires, not to speak about more violent instruments to protect the border. This being said, it's a balance that has to be struck between control at the external border, dissuasion, and allowing the people a fair treatment under the asylum regime. Their case has to be checked, and they have rights under the Geneva Conventions. Of course, they are fearful, but we have no choice. We have to make sure that the refugees can actually come there, and I want actually also to extend the gratitude we have as an international community to the neighboring countries, that they have not shut completely their borders to these poor people that come over the border. And then it is, I think, for all of us, Europeans, Americans, Canadians, the Swiss, the Norwegians, and other donors, to make sure that we compensate these countries by helping the refugees, but also by helping the host communities. And that requires humanitarian assistance, but it also requires development funds. Development funds to support the infrastructure, to support the medical equipment. Let me give you an example. If a refugee family goes over the border with 5 or 6 children, they have left their school behind, but they want to then enroll in education. Do they get the education in their tented settlement, or do they perhaps go to the local school, which can run in shifts, open in the afternoon, open in the evening? Well, this is probably much more cost efficient, but it requires funds to be given straight to the municipality and not necessarily through the UN agency. Or we give it to the UN agency and they work with the municipality. So you see, we have to use all the different avenues, the classical humanitarian actors, but also the local capacities. In some cases it can be local Red Cross associations, or it can be churches, or it can be groups of citizens. In other cases it can be the central government, the Ministry of Social Affairs, the Ministry of Health, or it can be the local municipalities that have a knowledge of the situation in the community.
وحشتني في كل يوم إنما
Before the break, we want to introduce another Syrian singer. He is Nur Mahana. He started his musical career as a reciter of the Quran and after switched to secular music. Nur Mahana with Wahashtini.
صدقنا من خوف لبكرة يفرقنا واحنا يا روح قلبي ما صدقنا اشتقت لي ورجعت لي وقلت لي وحشتني
opened to allow the movement of refugees
fleeing the advance and the brutality.
In Australia to do with asylum seekers.
Overcrowded refugee camps in Lebanon, Syrian asylum
More
seekers,
Palestinian refugees.
2 million Syrian.
People with absolutely nothing.
Welcome to Borders, a broadcast about migration and refugees, by Aitor Sáez, every Thursday at 4 p.m.
It is really hard to express in words the human suffering that they lay out before us.
On air in Serres, Greece, and also on internet, rodonfm.net.
Latest news.
The latest news about refugee issues this week, starting from the Middle East, 1 million Iraqi and Syrian refugees may face winter without United Nations aid. The United Nations Agency for Refugees says 1 million Iraqi and Syrian refugees could be left out of any winter aid due to the funding shortfall partly caused by a sharp increase of internally displaced people. In Africa, Ethiopia's refugee camps swell with South Sudanese escaping war. Tens of thousands of South Sudanese people have poured across the border into Ethiopia to the conflict in their own country. The rainy season has temporarily slowed the stream of people into flooded refugee camps in a region that has its own ethnic problems. In other part of the globe, Myanmar policy's message to Muslims get out. The Myanmar government has given the estimate 1 million Rohingya people in this coastal region of the country a choice. Prove your family has lived here for more than 60 years and qualify for a second-class citizenship, or be placed in camps and face deportation. In the last 3 weeks alone, 14,500 Rohingya have sailed from the beaches of the Rakhine state to Thailand. In Australia, asylum seekers' health care comparable to that in Australia, government tells United Nations. The Australian government says asylum seekers in offshore detention receive health care comparable to that in Australia, but that Papua New Guinea and Nauru are legally responsible for their welfare. At its second day before the United Nations Committee Against Torture, Australia was again subjected to a wide-ranging interrogation and forced to defend its policies of screening, mandatory detention, and offshore processing of asylum seekers. In the same country, Australia's Little Guantanamo, where Australia has temporarily closed its border to people from Ebola-affected West African nations, reports Dan Harrison for the Sydney Morning Herald. The report belonged the boats building an asylum and refugee policy for the long term is one of the most significant bipartisan documents about the government's asylum seekers policies. Let's move a bit now. In North Korea and Russia and North Korea signed agreement to deport illegal immigrants. The agreement, signed in September, states that anyone found to be without the correct documents will be detained, interviewed, and if they have entered illegally, deported within 30 days. The countries share a small land border on Russia's Far East region. And finishing with news full of hope. Statelessness is an evil that has been hidden for too long. The United Nations Refugee Agency launched its campaign to end statelessness by 2024. Statelessness affects the enjoyment of all the rights which most of us take for granted. For instance, the right to work, the right to vote, the right to welfare benefits or welfare, and a child's right to education. It prevents people from moving and increases their chances of arbitrary arrest or detention with no adequate remedies. That was the latest news from The Guardian and the New York Times. Our third Syrian musician is George Wassouf, a singer with over 30 albums released. Wassouf's vocal style has been emulated by many younger singers. He was born into a Christian household. Wassouf started singing at the age of 10 in his hometown Kafroum. He was called the miraculous of his time for his artistic talent in singing. With us, By Shidoni by George Wassouf.
كتير حواليك تحبك واقفة جنبك أنا خدت إيه من الدنيا دي صحاب كتير أحباب شوية شوية أمسح دموع تنزل دموع تحرق عينيا لعمري خنت ولو بكلمة برضى بقلي وبقول دي نعمة دي نعمة ولا كلت لقمة عيش حرام يا حرام عليا
يحسدوني من بعيد من غير ما حتى يقربوا مني
يشوفوا شايل ايه في عيوني لما بضحك
يحسدوني لما بضحك
ناس كتير حواليك تحبك واقفة جنبك تعبت داري واخبي جرحي اخاف تخوني في يوم ملامحي يبان عليا الحزن حتى في عز فرحي تعبت اشيل الحمل وحدي اشيل همومي لوحدي ايام تفوت على الحال ده ايه وسنين تعدي
يحسدوني من بعيد من غير ما حتى يقربوا مني
يشوفوا شايل ايه في عيوني لما بضحك
يحسدوني لما بضحك وبيقولوا لي يا بختك
يا بختك ناس كتير حواليك تحبك واقفة جنبك
The interview.
On today's interview, we will talk with Begoña Castella. She is foreign correspondent for the Spanish newspaper ABC and also volunteer in Caritas. Buenas tardes, Kalispera, good afternoon, Begoña.
Good afternoon.
We want to know, first of all, how many people are you attending every day in Caritas?
Well, we have a small refugee center in the center of Athens, and we usually help 300 refugees every day. Around 250 adults and about 50 children.
And this Caritas center is just giving a dining room or other kind of support?
Well, we offer a soup kitchen running every day from Monday to Friday. And we also offer clothes every week, social support with our social worker, Greek and English lessons, and vaccination for small children. And we have now seen that small children live with difficulty this migration with their parents because they do not have time to go to school. So we also have a little atelier for children to play and paint every Wednesday, and we try to have some nice parties for them as well, so that they remember that they are children as well.
So I am sure you knew already a lot of refugees. Can you say us which problems have to face the refugees in Athens?
Well, basically, refugees are treated as illegal immigrants. And this is because they have to obtain refugee status or asylum seeker status, and it's a very long and difficult progress. They usually come to Greece transit because they want to go to other European countries, and when they come to us in Athens, they are hiding from the authorities, or they are always afraid to be attacked by the neo-Nazis of the extreme right. So we see whole families from Afghanistan and Sudan and Syria and many other places in Asia and Africa, and very many young males that come from other countries to find a better future. But usually they are in transit and they want to go to Germany, Sweden, and other European countries.
And which is the nationality of these refugees? Most of them are Afghan or Syrian people?
The ones we see at the refugee center of Caritas are mostly Syrians, Afghanis, and a lot of Africans, usually from Sudan and from the north of Africa. But on any day we have different people from different places, and every week people change, so we don't have a fixed nationality as first nationality.
And did you feel that because of the economic crisis, the behavior of the Greek authorities and the society in front of the refugees are changing?
The attitude of the Greeks and the Greek authorities have changed, because before the crisis, before 2008, immigrants in general did jobs nobody wanted to do, no Greek wanted to do. So they were cheap. They did things without insurance, and they were tolerated. Now, when the crisis started in 2009, then things became more difficult. A lot of people lost their jobs, a lot of legal immigrants lost their jobs, and those who came, the immigrants that came from other countries, found very bad jobs or no jobs at all. And also, the crisis brought the extreme right, who is now very aggressively against all foreigners, legal, not legal. The neo-Nazi party of Golden Dawn is against all immigrants, and they also have a very xenophobic attitude, and a lot of violent incidents have been happening. And this is something which did not exist before in Greece.
And about your personal experience as a foreign correspondent that wrote about and against the right extreme in Greece, did you ever have some problem?
Well, my newspaper and most European media are not very interested in migration cases, except if there are deaths. When there is a death, then they become involved. But usually it's a general problem, and they don't care very much. But they do care about the rise of the extreme right and the neo-Nazi groups. And every time there's been an incident about violence or other things happening concerning extreme right and migrants, there's been a lot of interest. And it is very frightening for everybody involved. When you want to cover these incidents, you have to be also very careful, because the neo-Nazis can be very aggressive towards the media as well.
And about the Caritas activity, how important is the actions of the NGOs when the government doesn't cover the needs of the refugees?
Well, the NGOs working in Greece are essential to the survival of immigrants coming to Greece because the state does not provide accommodation, does not provide food, legal aid. There's no help at all. There's about less than 1,000 beds available, at least in the Athens area, for refugees, and it's very difficult for them to survive without the aid of NGOs. The most active ones are Médecins du Monde, which do fantastic work and also give a lot of medical treatment to these migrants. The Catholic Church with the Sisters of Mother Calcutta and the Caritas Refugee Center, and some other NGOs that give very good legal advice, and day centers that provide help also. But without the NGOs, the life of the migrants in Greece would be really terrible.
Thank you very much, Begoña Casella, for the interview with Borders in Rodon FM and also for your work as volunteer and journalist with the refugees issue.
Thank you very much.
We are going to talk in the near future, so we close the section of the interview talking with Begoña Casella, foreign correspondent for the Spanish newspaper ABC and volunteer in Caritas in Athens. We are arriving at the end of the second broadcast of Borders, today about Syria. During the last interview, we talked with a volunteer for Caritas in Athens. In case of necessity for basic help, medical assistance or legal support, we want to share the contact of Caritas. The address: Capodistriou Street 52 in Athens, Capodistriou Street 52 in Athens, and the telephone number 0030, Greek prefix, 2105247879, 2105247879. The email caritashellas@caritas.gr. And we have to leave. Until the next Thursday, we wish you a good afternoon and a nice week. You can find the program on Facebook, Praxis Greece, or on the webpage, aitorsaez.com. We leave you with Nur Mahana and the song Enkont Nasi. Thank you for listening us in Rodon FM. I am Aitor Sáez, and that was the second broadcast of Borders.
أفكرك يا مكان غرامي 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 بيسهرك وإن كان بيعادي بيحيرك 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 وإن كنت واحلف لك عالشوق معاك انا افكرك بالليل وشجونك واحلف لك عالشوق معاك انا افكرك بالليل وشجونك واحلف لك عالشوق بعيونك وفرحتك وانت بتحكي قصة هواك وشكوتك وانت بتشكي من نار قساك افكرك الليل وشجونك واحلف لك عالشوق معاك انا افكرك بالليل وشجونك واحلف لك عالشوق بعيونك افكرك بالليل وشجونك واحلف لك عالشوق بعيونك وفرحتك وانت بتحكي قصة هواك